Super. All right. Now we can move on to 6C. Drought update report. Mr. Hagmark.
All right. This is more than a 15-minute presentation, by the way. There were other items that were supposed to be on the agenda and got pulled off at the last minute because we just didn't have the staffing time to get to those. So we have a lot we could cover in here. So I expect we'll finish the rest of the meeting pretty much on this. So this is our water supply situation as it stands. Most optimistic we've seen in a long, long time. And more optimistic is what's coming tomorrow. So we're off to a good start. NOAA doesn't have anything helpful to tell us. There's equal chances of everything. As Councilmember White mentioned, we are what remains of this drought is right here in Santa Barbara, Ventura County. And interestingly enough, this storm, and I got a little information on that, seems to be just surgically targeted at this last remaining outpost of the drought. Sure. So if you hear a little bit of hope and excitement in my voice, it's hopefully to turn a corner here and get a little bit of reprieve.
Wipe that smile off your face.
I pulled up a Los Angeles Times site that had that diagram since 2013, almost month by month, so you can see it changing to right now.
That's powerful. That is a cool one. Mm-hmm. So just give just a little bit of detail, just because I'm excited to talk about it. The timing coming tonight, really bulk of the rain coming tomorrow through Saturday morning. And we are in the bullseye for this one. Just hope it doesn't slide sideways and go south. But 2 to 4 inches on the coast, 4 to 8 inches, and potentially even higher in the south-facing slopes, in particular our backcountry. Peak rain of up to 1 inch. We will be opening the city's DOC tomorrow to be responsive to any mudslides and flooding. And likewise, we're also ramping up some water resource operations to be prepared for this as well. Kind of different. Could see Kachuma come up 10 to 20 feet. It's incredible. As we've talked about before, as of this date, there is no project water in that lake yet. I mean, even though we've seen runoff, the lake is coming up. There is no water in there yet that belongs to the project because we haven't met those conditions on the river in which we would actually see water. And so I think this is the first opportunity we can see some of that. Inflows of somewhere between 20 and 40,000 acre feet. And again, there's always that possibility the storm could get knocked off and go south. But right now they're not predicting that. So yeah, it's just taking that drought, what remains of this drought, and overlaying it with this storm rain totals is really fascinating. This is probably the biggest part of the drought is left right in here, and that's where we're intending to get some significant rain tomorrow. So hopefully it doesn't let us down. Conservation for January, interesting. As the commission knows, January is always an interesting month because there really isn't much discretionary water usage. We saw January at 30%. Still good, but not where we obviously need to be in the long term. We did find and I just want to point this out, we were double counting water from the high school well. It was in our spreadsheet that it was going directly into the system, but it was actually going into the Ortega groundwater treatment plant. That's how it's plumbed. And so we came across that. It actually improved our conservation numbers only slightly. It raised it by 1%, but I thought that was kind of an interesting issue we came across and got that corrected. Gibraltar is full. It is full, and staff we're actually sending up an extra staff person either tonight or tomorrow morning to be on hand, but we expect significant flows through Gibraltar. Some projections are up to 8,000 CFS potentially going through there. This facility was designed to handle much more than that, so we feel comfortable at this time. I think the way that those radial arm gates are set up, each gate is set up to handle about 8,000 CFS each. I feel like we've gotten this covered, but we will have people up there. And typically when we see these events, we do lose access temporarily when we get rock slides and stuff across the road. The only access down to Gibraltar is from the upper road, from the ridge, because we expect any crossings down below to be completely buried. Water quality challenges had been improving in Gibraltar. It was really, I guess, kind of frustrating. We were getting, the TOCs had been dropping because the water coming in was actually improving. But I think with the storm event, it's going to probably pick up quite a bit of sediment and TOC again from the organics, a lot of it from the fire, and I think it's going to set us back again. But hopefully it won't be long before we can start diverting that water.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned earlier, we used to have a program of releasing into the top part of Mission Creek to recharge Basin 1. I don't know if the water quality in Gibraltar would be appropriate for that, if not for actually using it at Cater.
Yes, we stopped that, I think, in the early 2000s because of a concern about non-native species. There are fish that aren't necessarily native to Mission Creek, and there is a desire to make sure those fish did not pass through there, and so we have ended that practice of taking water from Gibraltar and putting it in Mission Creek. And I think Mission Creek's going to have its hands full here shortly anyway. But and then right now, so all we're diverting is water from Devil's Canyon, which that water has actually looked pretty good. That watershed didn't burn, and so we are getting, I want to say it was like 2 MGD from that, which is pretty substantial right now.
This is a really off-the-wall question, but is there a variation in the Mission Tunnel amount of infiltration water based upon seasons? I mean, during the drought, has the infiltration in Gibraltar Tunnel gone down? What happens with that?
Yeah, Mission Tunnel has gone down. It does. We've done quite a bit of work with UCSB on the age of the water coming into the tunnel, and as you can imagine, at its deepest, the tunnel's about 3,000 feet underground, and then it kind of tapers, right? And so there are portions of the tunnel that get rather quickly respond to rainfall, but the majority of the tunnel, I think the average is about 25 years for a molecule of water to get down to the tunnel, just based on they did some isotope testing. When was the last time that water molecule was exposed to the atmosphere based on its radioactivity, yeah, I guess.
I'll tell you, this was off the wall. So.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. Lake Cachuma currently at 17% of capacity. And like I mentioned, it's certainly it's 33,000, and we get 20 out of this. It's a considerable jump. Conchua project inflows still haven't been met. There are 5 USGS stream gauges downstream in which there needs to be a live stream before we start accruing credits to the project. The other effort that we're working with, I was on the phone on Tuesday with the Bureau of Reclamation. This year we currently have a 0% allocation, and we're obviously eager if there is inflow and, after we've met all the other requirements for fish and everything else, if there is any water, we'd like to understand what that process will be for getting an allocation this year. Right now, the only water the city has in Cachuma is stuff that we've imported. And today, I believe the emergency pump barge will have been moved back to Site 1. As the reservoir was coming up, it was going to float free. The pipeline was going to float free of the piles. And so the contractor was directed to remove the piles and move the barge back to Site 1. We're certainly hopeful that we will get back to gravity flow. But in the case, if the pipeline will be there, and we'll have to go back out and set the piles and barge if we end up having to relocate it back to Site 2. I think long term, it would be nice to get that pipeline put in permanently on the bottom of the lake, such that we don't have to go through this yo-yoing back and forth. And in future droughts, we know or if this one comes back with a vengeance, we know that Site 2 is the place that we need to be, and the pipeline to make that happen is in place and viable. So imported water, I just wanted to speak quickly. I'm sure you've all been reading about Oroville Dam, and in particular its spillway issues. I can't help but think that there was probably multiple things that went wrong, certainly to cause a disaster of that magnitude. I think at this point, we're feeling fairly confident that it won't impact us long term, except in the pocketbook. I heard $100 to $200 million to fix this problem up there. But as I understand, they've stabilized the situation, and so future allocations shouldn't be impacted by what the disaster they've had up there.
On that particular note, there was a LA Times article today that quoted a guy that was with an organization that sued DWR in 2005, saying that the hillside below the emergency spillway at Oroville would erode, and the federal court decided against them, against the suit, and allowed DWR to leave it the way it was. And this article suggested that the reason the court decided that was due to pressure from Metropolitan Water District. So I don't know if that's true or not, but it may be that as we deal with the state water project in many different aspects, we're sort of at the mercy of the whims of Metropolitan Water District, which is not an encouraging thought.
I think this, speaks to what we talk about all the time, which is diversifying our supplies, recognizing the vulnerabilities of the state water project. I think it certainly has been tremendously helpful in helping us to meet some of our drought demands, but it does have its shortcomings. I think the biggest one is the levees in the Delta. If those ever go, it's going to be months, if not years, before they're able to reestablish the Delta. And during that time, they're not going to be able to pass any state water through there. So, yes, every supply seems to come with its ups and downs, right? I got an email from CCWA today saying that a spill has started to occur at San Luis Reservoir, and it's not an instantaneous thing. It actually starts to occur over time, and so basically any water that has been stored in the lake is now starting to be lost to future allocations. We did, and I'm going to talk about that in my next slide. We couldn't get our water out of there fast enough, as we talked about, but we did enter into an agreement with the Metropolitan Water District to take our water and do a transfer of that water. So here's why this caught us off guard. This is the current rainfall for Northern California's 8-station index. This was the wettest winter on record, this green line here in the 80s, early 80s, and here's where we are now. The unprecedented amount of rainfall that they've gotten is what's really allowed them to run those pumps in a situation that I haven't seen, period. And so that is what's allowed them to put so much water in San Luis, which is good, except the fact that it pushes out our storage. Likewise, here's the index for the Central Valley. That's sometimes this is the one that really pushes it, because when they run the pumps at capacity, it reverses the flow of the San Joaquin River. But given that San Joaquin River is running full, there isn't a concern about that right now. So anyway, that has set us up, and we did enter into an agreement with the Metropolitan Water District. It is a 3-to-2 exchange, so we're going to get back 66% of our water. There is no cost component to this. There were 9 participants within CCWA for a total of just shy of 16,000 acre-feet of water. The city's portion was 4,600. And as I mentioned, San Luis has started to spill. And the latest is that Met remains confident they will be able to move all the water out. And I'm not exactly, I think their goal was to get it all out by the end of the month. And they still had some capacity in the reservoir. So our water right now isn't at jeopardy of being lost at this point. And then just a reminder that we still do are carrying a debt of about 6,400 acre feet that we need to pay back within the next 10 years. And the Desal Project, Seawater Pump A started up on February 6th. It has been on and off as we've been doing testing. So it's been intermittent how it's been operating. Seawater Pump B was placed on February 14th. And I'm happy to report that the barge is no longer necessary and will be departing. That barge was extremely expensive given the size of that barge, and so I'm pleased to see that that work is all done. We are still looking at a potable water production in sometime in April right now. Water sales agreement. We have reached general alignment on major key terms of a water supply agreement. Montecito Water District is planning to discuss these terms with its board on February 21st if any of the commissioners are interested in attending. MW will be seeking approval for cost sharing of the conveyance pipeline design, and we will be providing, in particular Rebecca will be doing a presentation to council on February 28th. So I wanted to give a little background on the conveyance pipeline. We haven't talked too much about this, and we are gathering more information. So we're currently working on final design. The project benefits, the pipeline is essential to being able to move water, desal water regionally. It also provides the water quality benefits. One of the nuances of desal water, which is interesting, is depending on seasonality, it depends on how far out the desal water goes, and so it has a lot of, there are times of the year when we're going to have in the winter desal water going all the way out into the San Roque area, and then in the summer when there's demand in the low zone, it isn't going to go very far. So you're going to have this significant change in water quality that isn't necessarily desirable. You want to kind of try and have more of a consistent supply, consistent water quality, and so having this pipeline does have some benefits to the community in the sense that we would be distributing this water and blending it with other supplies that the city has. The pipeline could support future potable reuse. We have sized it sufficiently that we believe it would, maybe in combination with the recycled water line, could be extended up to Cater and or to Laurel. So the general alignment is in the right direction, and we're leaving that option open if that presents itself. The conveyance pipe. Mm-hmm.
Physically, how big is that pipe?
It's going to be a 24-inch PVC line. Mm-hmm. We've decided to go with PVC because of its resistance to corrosion. One of the things that we have contemplated is actually using this pipeline to pump permeate, which is pure desalinated water, whether that water has just gone through potable reuse or desal. It has no minerals in it, and taking that water up there and blending it with our surface water could be not only cut down on the costs to add those minerals in, but also significantly improve our surface water as well before it would get retreated at the Cater Water Treatment Plant. So what are the criteria for moving forward with the conveyance pipeline? I think if we stay at 3125 and don't partner with Montecito, I think given our financial situation, there's no reason why we would move forward with this right now. However, if we do contemplate an expansion and or enter into a water sales agreement, I think that's really what's going to trigger the need to move forward with the conveyance pipeline.
Is this a different conveyance pipeline than the one you've talked about in the past that goes up to Mission to get to the top half of the city?
This is it.
Same one.
This is the same one. Just kind of the general layout of this. The pipeline will start here at the desal plant on Yananali, goes over to Cayo Cesar Chavez. Right now, it would go up to Ortega, up Olive to Sola, jog over at Sola, and then up Garden to Mission. This does require, and this is part of our discussions with Montecito, it relies on existing 24-inch transition main that the city already has in place to actually make this all work. Hopefully some potential sharing of the cost of the existing main, transmission main that would be necessary to make this work.
How does this play into supplying Montecito Water District with water?
So, great question. Once we get the water back to this transmission main, we can force it up through the existing 24-inch that we have there on Mission, and that line goes all the way back up to Cater. And at Cater, right in front of the clear well, is where we have a diversion where we can send water south to Montecito.
A long route, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the blue line on there is something that would have to be built, and then the existing line is from there to Cater?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So this line, just a little details on it. It's about 15,000 linear feet of pipe. We are proposing doing an open cut construction, very similar to how we do our main replacement work. Several reasons we like that. Open cut, it's a little more traditional, meaning our local contractors can go after this work. I think we get probably a more competitive pricing for that. The timeline for doing this work there's less unknowns as they move along. And so we do feel like we did look at some directional drilling, but it gets really difficult. Where do you stage to drill that? And then there's so many unknowns when you're drilling that I think the risk runs high. And then there's only a handful of contractors probably in the nation who could do it. The other issue is soil contamination. Again, something we come across frequently with our water main replacement work. And I feel more confident about this, that we can control this. We've done this before. This isn't, we can put in contingency for dealing with it. We can let the contractor know what we've been through a lot of these streets already, so we know which ones are probably the most contaminated. Typically, once you get up to probably Ortega, you've probably gone through most of the areas where there was poor industrial behavior in the past. So preliminary project cost estimate is $12 million. I do think that's on the high side, but we're using that right now as for our loan. Should be able to do it for less, and I'm optimistic with local contractors going after it. We could see a really good bid on that. The construction duration somewhere between 12 and 16 months, and we hope to help wrap up final design by July. Go ahead and bid that project, and then, of course, at that point, we would be sitting on our hands waiting to see whether we entered into an agreement with Montecito or if for some reason we needed to expand the plant for ourselves.
Chairman, in terms of this becoming a regional facility, obviously you've gotten it up to where you can put it into the South Coast Conduit, which would get it to Montecito and conceivably even to Carpinteria. Is there some thought to run the South Coast Conduit backwards and send that water to Goleta also?
No, not right now, because that water coming in from the South Coast Conduit above Cater is raw water. And so we're not contemplating reversing that, but we do have connections with Goleta should that ever come about. We do have some interties, and we've been talking about maybe establishing another one that would potentially make opportunity. I think they're headed down a different road, but it could make it possible.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to go over our water supply strategy. In particular, set expectations about when we think we're going to have information. So as much as things have been positive, it's still premature to celebrate. We still got a groundwater basin that's at historic lows, and we've talked about Kachuma there. We continue to plan for drought, and I think this is what's important. We're going to be looking this year, do we have adequate supplies for 3 years? If not, what kind of conservation do we need to make sure we have water for 3 years? And if that's not sufficient, then what other supplies do we need? So those will be kind of the criteria we're going to be going through to establish that. We have tentatively set March 21st as our earliest date that we would, I guess it would be Water Commission that 17th, would be the earliest in which we can conceive of having kind of a meaningful discussion about our current water supply situation and next steps. Likely it'll probably roll into April, but what this does is we want to get this question answered because this time around we're going to wait to answer the water supply decision before developing rates, because I think to develop rates based on a multitude of different water supply situations is I think is painful, and I don't think the community's in the mood for a bunch of different options, particularly some of the scarier ones. So I think what we want to do is see what our water supply situation ends up being, then develop those rates that reflect that. And so it is going to delay the implementation of water rates. Probably looking at August, maybe even September. And I have I'm getting ahead of myself, but we will be bringing, wastewater will be following its traditional timing, and we'll likely be talking with the Water Commission in March about those. So drought funding, oh man, we had some great movement on Prop 1 finally. Hannah Beth Jackson's office has been really active in trying to help us get access to Prop 1 money for Desal. And as you might remember, that got passed by the voters in November of 2014. And DWR is the one administering this money, and they have been incredibly slow to get this money out. But with Senator Jackson's support, she reached out to Bill Croyle, the new director of DWR, and he's taken an interest in this, in particular how long it's taken his staff to get this out. And he's also, given the time that it's taken to get this out, he's also been receptive to a alternative eligibility date. I think we might have talked about this previously, this idea that standard boiler language says that any work done before you get the grant is ineligible, but they're looking at making it potentially effective all the way back to when the Prop 1 was passed. So certainly more optimistic news than we've heard in a while, and there's about $100 million for desal projects in that grant. We are following the WIFA that was put out by Feinstein's office and seeing if there's anything viable in there. Most recently, and what was on your Council Regina report, was the USBR Water Smart drought response program. We had talked about this. There was only $2 million put in there this year. It's pretty minuscule. But having said that, we think we have a good chance at getting something. So we went ahead and threw our name in the hat for that. And with it, we have to get a resolution passed by the council. And so that's why I tried to get that in there quickly so that we could meet that grant timeline. And so that was in your packet today. But you will not be taking any action on that. Just more of an informational for you. And then we just presented to council the state revolving fund loan, which you heard in January, but we just did that with council. So water rates, I kind of we'll just go over the schedule here. April, give direction to the rate consultant. Again, that's predicated on having our water supply strategy kind of ironed out. May, June, seek approval for the rate notice. July, hold a public hearing, and actually the public hearing could be probably August as well, July, August. So that's what we're hoping as probably the better case scenario. And then wastewater rates, again, will follow probably traditional noticing and adoption by June 30th. And then water conservation, we just had a simple message today: rain on, sprinklers off. It's pretty simple, and yet most people have their sprinklers or their irrigation system on timers and forget about it. And, if we can save some water by just letting people know that it should be off. I think it could be off probably now for a month or two. So that completes our presentation for today.
All right, great, thank you. Anybody have any questions or anything? kind of hit him while we were talking about it. So, okay, we'll move on to item number 7, the water